I personally would bet. Professor Swaran Singh, how much international support does the UN Secretary General have and the Turkish President have at the current time in these efforts? I mean, it would surely be in the world's interest, if there is peace. So the world must be invested in it.
I think one external player which has become fairly active and successful in dealing with the Russia and Ukraine tensions is Turkey. Mm-hmm. And of course, region, but UN Secretary General visiting Kiev and Lviv, two cities.
Yes.
And then, of course, touring the university, meeting Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, is a reflection of enormous confidence that international community is reposing in Russian forces being now restrained to far eastern part of Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And that means that the crisis is no longer being seen as, sort of across Ukraine, uncertain. Mm-hmm. There is a better estimation of Russian operations being limited to certain areas. Second, of course, is the issue of this Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, which since early March has been under Russia. But it is operating as usual with the Ukrainian staff. Except that there were initially, particularly, some sort of constant shelling. And of course, both Russia and Ukraine continue to blame each other for that shelling.
Yes.
And they sort of have used expressions like nuclear terrorism. And Ukraine continuously does sort of disaster management drills in the vicinities, saying that we are looking for leakages. Russia keeps blaming that there is a likelihood of sabotage from Ukrainian side. They were talking about this possibility even before UN Secretary General's visit. So those kind of contestations continue, but the fact is that Zaporizhia is the biggest nuclear power plant. And, in that sense, the concerns are rather serious here.
Sure.
And of course, the third element is the wheat exports. And that thanks to Turkish intervention and UN Secretary General's intervention, 25 ships have gone out. But then again, in Swastipol, for example, you remember explosions in Saki Air Base in Crimea area, and how President Zelensky, sort of interestingly first thanked, saying that all those who are trying to, sort of push out the occupier, and then immediately changed his tone, saying, no, we should steer clear from such sabotages.
Right.
So I think there is a certain amount of certainty of Russian operations limiting to the east, and that makes it possible for Turkish President and UN Secretary General to visit these two cities.
So conditions seem to be correct for peace talks. At some stage, there's probably, from the Russian side too, maybe they could have an exit plan.
I think that's a difficult question in that sense. I think Russians are still exploring their exit plan. Their military objectives in the beginning were very ambitious. They perhaps did not estimate the way the West will be able to covertly, indirectly help Ukraine to stand up to Russia. And they have, over a period of time, really shrunk their operations. I mean, instead of looking for blind written guarantees from NATO and Americans, they are now restricted to largely Donbass area and parts of southeast Ukraine. So in that sense, all that Russians are trying to do is perhaps ensure their free access to Crimea and Black Sea, ensure that the Donbass region continues to be consolidated under their armed forces. So it might end up being repetition of what Russians were able to do in Georgia, Moldova, Crimea earlier, which means that these forces might be there for a long haul. And shelling already is sort of restricted, as you can notice now. It's no longer the way it was in the initial weeks of this operation from Russian side.
Right.
So I think that the both sides are looking for exit strategy, but President Putin finds it very difficult to sort of negotiate with President Zelensky.
Okay.
That will be really coming down for him in that sense. So I think difficulty is how to involve some bigger players.
Yes.
And that is where I think UN General Secretary's visit there could be an indication that maybe United Nations would be willing to intervene, and that could perhaps create a certain space for face saving for President Putin to begin to think of it. But it's not going to be that Russian forces are likely to just vacate all parts of Ukraine. That looks like a remote possibility.
Professor Swaran Singh, would you see the IAEA being allowed to go to Zaporizhia and to assess the situation there? or because the Russians were not allowing them to come, apparently, according to the previous reports. And of course, the Ukrainians say that they want the IAEA there.
I think with UN Secretary General being there in Kiev, it looks like a possibility that Russia and Ukraine might agree to allow International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors to come and certify as to what is happening inside that plant, because Ukrainians have been accusing Russia of deploying heavy weaponry in that plant. Of course, also mining in the vicinity of plant, and Russians have been denying that they have put any heavy weaponry in the plant. So it will be a good sign of stability, because Zaporizhia is the largest plant, and this could be sort of really a dangerous situation in case either side makes any mistake, or shelling ends up landing somewhere near reactors. So this kind of IAEA inspection would be, I think, a great confidence building measure, and could open, I think, that kind of possibility or step forward in potential negotiations.
Okay.
Turkish president is known to be sort of fairly close to President Putin, and UN General Secretary is an international persona. In that sense,
Sure.
I think these visits and something that could come out of these visits could create stability, at least to begin with. But only difficulty is that Russia would find it extremely difficult to find its exit strategy, because it has already come down from initial very ambitious goals that it had placed
Okay.
before international community, and it has been shrinking in terms of its military objectives since
Right.
then. So the minimal of consolidation in Donbass region, Crimea, and Black Sea is something that seems non-negotiable.
Okay.
Now, whether Ukraine will be willing to take that, that's a difficult question to answer.
A final